Hello, this is David. Welcome to a video review of Jorion's Chapter 11, Value at Risk Mapping. Now, mapping, of course, is an important concept to us in risk measurement and risk management. We're in topic 5, but it's generally quite foundational in risk management. And it's interesting also that I don't see a lot of coverage of mapping outside of risk management in finance generally. So it's not as if we have a huge body of literature like there are on some other topics like volatility or risk measurement. So the Jorion Chapter 11 here is long in the tooth. It was, after all, published well over a decade ago. That's how well seasoned it is in the FRM syllabus, but it remains one of the few really efficient summaries of this vital topic, VaR mapping. So we are well seasoned, and I will say that, as usual, to prepare for the exam, you don't need our learning spreadsheets. However, we know from experience that with VaR mapping, if your agenda is beyond the exam or to go deeper than the exam into the VaR mapping topic, it's almost inevitable that you would want to engage with the spreadsheets that actually concretely implement the VaR mapping, in particular for the fixed income approaches that we're going to look at shortly. It's just they are a little bit too difficult to get your head around completely just with concepts and words. You really have to engage in the actual mathematical implementation of the VaR mapping, in my opinion. But the good news there is there's really no fancy or advanced math. It's all the building blocks of arithmetic that implement the VaR mapping concept. So with that said, you can see we have the learning objectives that have really been associated with VaR mapping almost the entire time that I've been teaching. Although I think on the exam we've really only seen the fixed income VaR mapping, and that's because that really is the majority of this chapter uses the fixed income as an illustration of the VaR mapping. There are some other instruments here at the end, but we don't go too deeply into that. I'll just cover that more conceptually, mapping it with respect to forwards, forward rate agreements, interest rate swaps, and options. So we start by explaining the principles underlying VaR mapping and describe the mapping process. So to map the risk factors is to identify a small set of risk factors, or primitives, as the building blocks. That really should say building blocks. So that's really, if there's a philosophy to VaR mapping, it's to translate complexity of a position into something simpler by mapping to primitives, or reduced set of risk factors. Of course, this is very symbolic, but this is really the essence of it. An actual portfolio is complicated. There may be, if we had time, we could actually characterize that portfolio by identifying all the risk factors and all of their pairwise correlations. But a large realistic portfolio, in reality, it becomes very quickly complex. Even if we just looked at the pairwise correlations, those can quickly become very large numbers, this curse of dimensionality. Well, VaR mapping is just the idea that to account for the risk of the portfolio, we probably don't need actually to itemize every single risk and all of their relationships. If we probably just need to identify the primitive factors, map our portfolio to those reduced set of primitive factors, and maybe that gets us 80, 90, 95, 98% in terms of accuracy of the portfolio. So it might remind you of principal component analysis. I would say that philosophically it shares a lot in common with that. So that's why the primitives are so important here. Large scale aggregation is too complex, and it is too time consuming to model all positions individually as risk factors.